What's up guys, HCZ here, welcome back. Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Power of the Elements is finally here, and now let's start taking a look at the decks that we got from this amazing set that we haven't had a really good set for a long time. I guess Burst of Destiny was the last one that was really good, but now we're getting so many good decks and so many good support for older decks that we can now have a complete change in the format. And today we're starting with the potentially best deck of the following format, so we're taking a look at Sprite. This is the deck that everyone is scared of because we've seen from the OCG that this deck can be very terrifying. Is it going to be tier 0 like it was in the OCG? Only time will tell, but even if it's not tier 0 deck, it's one of the best decks that you can potentially play in the upcoming format. And for anyone who wants to play the game for the next few months, whether you're planning to play this deck or whether you're planning to play against this deck, I hope this video helps you out to understand exactly what the deck is capable of, what the deck is supposed to do, and how to counter the deck as well. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So let's start with the Sprite monsters. We have 3 copies of Sprite Blue. Now this is the card that searches you a monster on summon. So all the Sprite main deck monsters basically are level 2 extenders. You can special summon them from your hand if you control level 2 or a rank 2 monster. So all those monsters in your hand, they can basically get the free special summon from the hand, and they all do something either upon summon or when your opponent activates a monster effect or a spell or trap effect. So this is the card that searches you a monster, and it's basically the one that you're going to be starting with most of the time when you have a level 2 monster, and the card you're going to be searching for most of the time if you're looking for more extenders is one of the 3 copies of the next card, which is 3 copies of Sprite Jet. This is the card that searches you spell and trap Sprite cards when it's summoned. Really good card. The deck does have not only a card that gets you a monster from the deck, but it also has a card that can be used as a quick play disruption or as an offensive tool. The deck does have really good targets for this card, so these are the ones that you want to be maxing out on because they are the ones that give you more cards. Now for the negate part of the deck, we have 2 copies of Sprite Red. Now these 2 cards I'm going to show you, this and the next one, are the ones that are basically help you play around hand traps and play around interruptions your opponent has going second. They are the same extender type of effect, and this card negates monster effects. So when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can tribute another monster that is either level 2, link 2, or rank 2 and negate the effect, and if you tribute it a rank or a link 2, you can also destroy that monster as well. Most of the time you're not going to be tributing a link 2 or a rank 2 because you don't want to be tributing your rank 2 when it activates its effect, because it needs to detach a material in order to get you a level 2 from the deck, so you cannot really tribute it and then the effect will not go through even if you negate a card like an Ash Blossom or a Veiler. So most of the time when you're playing around hand traps, you're going to be tributing an actual level 2 monster, but going second when you have a lot more extenders and then you can get a Sprite Elf on the field before you do anything else, that's when you will be able to tribute a link 2 monster to be able to destroy the monster you negate as well. So yeah, this card is really good. And the last Sprite monster in the main deck is a 1 copy of Sprite Carrot. This is the card that negates spells and traps, basically the exact same thing as Sprite Red. If you tribute a link to or rank to it, will also destroy the card, but it also doesn't matter too much, to be honest, because when you negate spells and traps, the only ones that you care about destroying that are not going to the graveyard anyway are field spells and continuous spells, so you don't really care too much about this effect. You play only one of this card because monster effect is always more relevant than spell and trap negation, and this card is accessible through so many different ways, so if you need to get access to it, then you can get it very easily. Now for some other monsters that we play in the deck, we have 3 copies of Deep Sea Diva. Now there are a plethora of normal summons you can play in Sprights, but this is the one that I've chosen for this particular build because I am using Hulky Fibrax in the extra deck. If you're not playing Hulky Fibrax in the extra deck, then Nimble Beaver is basically a better normal summon for Sprights because it's a card that helps you get a monster back from the grave as well, so the 3rd copy is not dead, because if you start with Diva, you're always going to get another Diva from the deck, so if you draw the 3rd Diva during a grind game, then it will not have a target unless you play something like a Heavy Infantry, but I feel like it's too bricky to play, it's kind of unnecessary. So if you want your 3rd copy to be live, then Nimble Beaver is a much better normal summon, but Diva is a tuner, so she helps a lot with a lot of Hulky Fibrax plays, which I feel like the deck has a lot of unfair lines it can do with Hulky Fibrax, not just things that you can do to get more interruptions in your hand, but also being able to play around D-Barrier, which a lot of Sprite players are going to lose to because they don't play a lot of Link monsters, they focus a lot more on the XCs, but Links are something that you need to utilize a lot in Sprites so that you don't lose to D-Barrier at all. We play 3 copies of Swap Frog. This is very standard in Sprites. You would use totally very consistently. You can special summon this from your deck Gigantic Sprite, and then you can send your Ronin, and then you link them away, you bring this card back with Sprite Elf, you send another Swap Frog, and then you can get back your Ronin Toadin, and boom, you have it totally awesome on the field. And we all know how degenerate Toad is in this deck because you can use its effect multiple times throughout a turn, because you can use its effect and then you tribute it to use it, so you can bring it back with your Sprite Elf. Toad is not a hard once per turn, so you can use the effect again. So basically, not only are you recycling a lot of cards, you're also stealing and negating a lot of your opponent's cards. So yeah, Swap Frog is really good. We play 1 copy of Ronin Toadin. You don't need to play more than turn 1. Even if this card gets banished, the deck can still play without Totally Awesome. So if this gets DD Crowed, it's not the end of the world. You can still have a lot more other ways to push for a game and have more interruptions on the board without having access to Toad. So you just need to play this one copy. And also, I am not playing Dupe Frog. A lot of players are playing Dupe Frog, so they have something decent to special summon with Toad, aside from just summoning another Swap Frog on the deck during the standby phase. But the thing is, the new monster that got released, the new TCG exclusive fusion monster that is Power of the Elements, that requires 2 monsters with the same type and attribute but different names, is something that you need to be wary of. Because if you summon Dupe Frog from the deck, then this deck can get Super Polyed, which this deck should never be able to get Super Polyed. So you don't really need to play a card that doesn't offer you too much and basically makes you lose to a certain card, so that the deck doesn't normally lose to. So this is why you don't really need to play Dupe Frog. If this card was not released, then yes, Dupe Frog would have been a really good one for the deck, but now I feel like it's a win more card that can basically give you lose conditions that the deck doesn't already have. So yeah, I don't recommend playing Frog with this card being around. Now let's get to the hand traps. This deck does play a lot of hand traps. It's a deck that can do so much with so little, so whenever you see a deck like this, then you know that it's going to be playing at least 12 hand traps, and that's the exact amount playing. We're playing 3 copies of Ash Blossom. It's the most generic one. As long as Branded Fusion is a 3, then I don't feel like there is a hand trap that's better than Ash Blossom, just because there will be a lot of decks, especially Terra Lament decks, playing Branded Fusion, so you need Ash Blossom in order to be able to negate that. We play 3 copies of Effect Veiler. The reason I'm playing Effect Veiler on top instead of Impermanence is because we're playing Selene with Hulky Fibrax, so we can go into Access Code. Again, I mentioned that this deck can sometimes lose to Deep Barrier, but depending on how you build the deck, then you can play around it very, very well. This deck is really good at spamming Link monsters because it has so many extenders that you can just spam the board with monsters, and then by just being able to negate your opponent's interruptions with Sprite Carrot and Sprite Red, then you can just go into an Access Code and basically destroy your opponent without even needing to access any of your Xyz monsters. So if your opponent's side barrier against you, then they do something, but they don't do a lot, so it's basically a waste. They're still gonna get OTK'd. We're playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre. This is another card that, as long as the adventure package is at full power, then it's a really good card, but also this card has applications against Sprite itself, because, like I mentioned before, Gigantic Sprite is a monster that doesn't detach for cost. It needs to detach a monster out of any Xyz monster you control for the effect, and then if you do detach, then you can summon from the deck. So if you Ghost Ogre the Gigantic Sprite, it doesn't have anything to detach from, so it doesn't summon from the deck, unless they have another Xyz monster on the field. But let's be honest, turn 1, it's not like your opponent is going to go out of their way to make 2 Xyz monsters before they activate Gigantic Sprite's effect. Just play around Ghost Ogre. It's not going to happen very often, so this is why Ghost Ogre is a really good card, not only to stop the adventure packets, but also stopping Gigantic Sprite as well. And the last hand trap play is 3 copies of Cyframe Gear Gamma. Now, this card in this particular deck is much better than in any other deck because of Emergency Teleport. This is a level 2 monster. It's also a tuner monster, so you can go into Gigantic Sprite, Sprite Elf, you can go into Hulky Fibrax because it's a tuner. It's a really good card. On top of that, this is basically the best hand trap you have against Sprites, because if they summon one of their starters like Diva or Nimble Beaver, if you just Ash or Veiler it, then they have a level 2 monster on the field, so basically all their Sprite monsters in their hand are extenders that they can just special summon, so it doesn't do much. But this card destroys the monster, so if you get rid of the monster from the field, unless they have something like a starter or a Swap Frog with another water, or if they're playing their own Teleport Gamma, then they will not be able to activate all the extender effects from their hand in order to get more monsters on the field. So it's a card that can basically seal the deal if you know that basically your opponent is going to be able to set up a Sprite Red before you go into Gigantic Sprite, so they will not be able to negate it with Gamma. And this is why this is the only hand trap that you should basically throw at your opponent when you're playing against Sprite, and before they make the Gigantic Sprite. Any other hand trap, you keep it for Gigantic Sprite, but this card, it's actually a good play to throw at the first play they do, just because they will not have a monster after you use it, so they will need a very certain kind of hand in order to play around. And we play, of course, the 1 copy of Driver, because you need to play it in order to be able to activate Gum. For the spells, we play 3 copies of Sprite Starter. This is the E-Telly of the deck. It special summons a Sprite from your deck, and for some reason, it loses you life points equal to its original attack. I mean, yes, it's going to lose you games in time, but it doesn't matter too much because of how good the card is. It's also searchable, so you don't really care about all the facts that you can basically get all the extenders from the deck. So this card is amazing, definitely a 3 of. The fact that it loses you life points will hardly ever matter. We play 1 copy of Sprite Smasher. This is the other searchable target with Sprite Jet, because if you already have a starter, you need another card in order to be able to search, and this is the best card you can do so, because it's a card that you can basically banish a Sprite card from your hand or graveyard to activate 1 of 3 effects. The only effect you can activate is the 3rd one, because the first 2 effects are basically, the first one is for Spriggans and the second one is for Therions, so we're going to be using the 3rd effect, which you can banish 1 level, rank, or link to monster you control, and 1 card your opponent controls. And because this is a quick play card, you can use it both offensively and defensively, depending on how you want to use it. So yeah, this is another really good searchable target with Sprite Jet. We play 3 copies of Emergency Teleport. You need to play a lot of extenders in the deck that can get monsters from the deck, because I mentioned again that Gamma is going to be a very popular card against this deck, and if you're not playing Teleport with Gamma yourself, then you're basically relying on you drawing a Sprite starter, which is just a 3-of, in order to be able to play around a Gamma on your Diva, on your Nibbled Beaver, and if you don't draw it, then you will not be able to do anything. This card just giving you the level 2 monster from the deck, then it means that all of your Sprite monsters in your hand are going to be live, so Gamma doesn't do that much damage to you, so this is an amazing card. On top of that, Gamma is a tuner, so when you summon it from the deck with Teleport, you can go into Hulky Fibrax plays as well. We play 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More in the main deck. Yes, this card is going to be main worthy in the upcoming format because of this deck and because of other decks as well, but mainly because of Sprite, because all of those lines that you need to play around are always backed up with hand traps, because this deck plays so many. So if you play Droplet to counter this deck, most of the time you're going to need to discard at least 2 cards Droplet to basically negate Sprite, Elf, and Totally Awesome. If they have a carrot or a red on the field, then you will need to discard 1 more card, and then you will not have enough cards in your hand left in order to be able to play around their 1 or 2 hand trap they have in their hand as well. So Dark Ruler No More, even though you will not be able to OTK them, just being able to take control of the board is good enough to play against this deck, because you need to have enough cards in your hand to play around the hand traps that they will have on top of having their board, so this card is really good. On top of that, against Punk decks, this card is amazing because they have all those lines. They can go with the Hot Red Dragon Abyss with a Hulky Fibrax in order to go into Calamity, so they will not be able to play. If you just Dark Ruler them during the start of the main phase, they will not be able to activate Hulk, they lose the negate with Abyss. If they have Regulus on the field, they will not be able to use that as well. So yeah, this card is really good in the main deck in the following form. And the last card is the 1 copy of Called by the Grave, because it's an absurd card and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't play it in pretty much any deck lane. I guess, unless you're playing Eldritch. If you're playing Eldritch, then maybe Called by is not the greatest card, but if you're playing anything else, then you should be playing this card. For the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Gigantic Sprite. This is the card that basically makes a lot of cards useless. For example, one card that you're not going to be seeing in the following format is Nibiru, and this card is the sole reason that. This card is a card for some reason that locks both you and your opponent into not being able to summon monsters that are not level 2, rank 2, or link 2 for the rest of this turn once you use the effect to summon a monster from the deck. So your opponent is never going to be able to Nibiru you when you activate this effect, so Nibiru is basically useless against this deck unless you're playing the deck wrong and you spam a lot of monsters before you activate Gigantic Sprite's effect, but it's not like anyone is going to side Nibiru against this deck regardless, so I don't feel like you need to be afraid of that. Maybe if someone is maining Nibiru for other matchups, that's when this deck can be sometimes vulnerable to Nibiru. So game 1, make sure you activate this card's effect before you get 5 monsters on the board. So this card is the one that gets you any level 2 monster from the deck. Basically, you're going to be going for Swap Frog 99% of the time to go into your Toadlaze. This card is amazing. On top of that, it has an effect that it says that you can use Link 2 monsters as a level 2 monster for material for this card. And when this card has a Link monster under it as material, also its original attack is doubled, so it becomes 3800. So not only can you use any of your Link 2s as material, but it also makes this card bigger. So when you're going second with this deck, you can use cards like Nightmare Cerberus and Nightmare Phoenix to a much better extent than any other deck. Just because not only can you use them to pop a card, but then you can use them for Xyz material for this card. It's not like you need to link them up into a Unicorn or something like that to make value. No, this deck can basically use them as Xyz material for a card that starts your engine, locks your opponent into summoning other monsters and level 2, link 2, or rank 2, and then you basically can get whatever you want. So this card is absolutely amazing. It gives you a lot of great lines. It's one of the most broken cards that a deck has ever received, and it's very similar to MX Saber Invoker, but it's actually even better because it does have a lot more applications than Invoker in this particular deck. So yeah, this card is ridiculous. We play 1 copy of Totally Awesome. You don't need to play more than 1 just because Sprite Elf can basically keep bringing it back from the graveyard. And again, the same thing with Ronin. If it gets banished by a Crow or a Cold Buy or something like that, it doesn't matter too much because the deck does have ways to either go for game or have more interruptions without Toad. This is basically the cherry on top that makes the deck broken. We have seen from the OCG that even without Toad, because Toad got banned, the deck is still really good and it can play. So this is why this card is not the most important thing in the deck, but it's something that basically adds insult to injury and makes the deck more broken than it should be. We're playing 1 copy of Cat Shark. This is a card that basically combines really well with Gigantic Splight, because Gigantic Splight doubles its original attack, its effect, so when you're using Cat Shark on it, it basically becomes a 64k beater, so you can destroy pretty much anything or go for game. It's a really good card to have in the deck. It's very easy to make. We play 1 copy of Sky Cavalry Centauria. This is basically the Zeus line for the deck. Any deck that can go into Xyz monsters should have a Zeus line because Zeus is just so broken. So you make this card, it cannot die by battle once it has material, so you basically run it over into something and then you make the 1 copy of Downer Magician on top of it, so you can have 4 materials, and then you make your Sky Thunder Zeus on top of it and you have your 4 material Zeus. It's a really good going second line if you need to get rid of a board. It's very easy to make, it baits anything, and you don't even need to commit too much on them. Now, we play a lot of Link monsters in the deck. I feel like these Xyz monsters are the ones that you need to play for sure. You can play other cards, you can play like Herald of Pure Light, you can play Jin Buster, but I feel like all these cards, they are not super necessary, and being able to play a lot of other Link monsters makes the deck more resilient to D-Barrier, because if you basically full your extra deck with Xyz monsters and you lose to D-Barrier, and D-Barrier is going to be a card that people are still gonna play because of decks like Punk and Branded and Tier Elements, so they will side it sometimes against Sprite as well to see how it goes, so you need to be able to play around that. So for a lot of Link monsters we play, the first one is of course the most important one. We play 2 copies of Sprite Elf. This is the card that revives your Link 2, your Level 2, and your Rank 2 monsters from the graveyard during the main phase. It's the reason Toad is so broken in this deck, because you can use its effect twice, because Toad is a soft once per turn, and this card is absolutely amazing. It also makes your monsters untargetable, that this card points to, so it makes them more resilient. This is why a card like Impermanence is not that good of a card against this deck, because it's not like hard drawing Impermanence for the 6th card. You can basically give you some value, because Toad is always going to be under this card's column, this card's Link Arrow, so it's never going to be able to get Impermed, so it's not something that is very, very good. So this is why Veiler is a card that, because you can go into Hulk Selene, is a much better card than Imperm, especially when you're playing against this deck. We play 1 copy of Hulky Fibrax. Now, the reason we're playing this card is not only because of the Selene access code line to play around D-Barrier, there's also a really good play you can do with this deck that can give you an interruption in your hand. So this card can get you any tuner out of the deck. Most of the time you're going to be going for Veiler, when you're going second to go into Selene, but when you're going first, there is a really good thing you can do. You can special summon either a Ghost Ogre or an Ash Blossom from your deck. Mainly Ash Blossom, because Ghost Ogre, if you summon it, then you can use it from the field as well. But Ash Blossom, when you summon it, with Swap Frog, you can get it back to your hand. Swap Frog doesn't say that you have to return a frog in your hand in order to use this second normal summon effect. No, you can get any monster from your field back into your hand. So if you're going into Hulk and special summoning your Ash Blossom from the deck, you can use Swap Frog as effect to get your Ash Blossom into your hand, and then you have an extra interruption. And if you're playing against a deck that plays Branded Fusion, then you basically have the best way to counter them, because Ash Blossom is just the nuts against Branded Fusion. Any hard negate basically means that your opponent is going to be able to activate another Branded Fusion, but not if you Ash Blossom. So this is why this play with Hulk is really, really good, and I highly recommend playing Hulk Fibrax in Sprites, whether you're going for the second play to play around D-Barrier or for the Ash Blossom play, and which is why I also prefer Diva in the deck, because it's a tuner monster, because Hulk offers so much for the deck. We play 1 copy of Nightmare Cerberus to be able to pop monsters, especially when you Dark Ruler your opponent, you need to be able to get rid of the board somehow, and this is another card you can do it. And again, I mentioned that you can use it for Gigantic Sprite as material afterwards. We also play 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix, basically the same reason, get rid of a card and then use it for your best monster in the deck, very, very simple. We play 1 copy of Selene, because we are playing Veiler in the deck. With Hulk, we can go into Access Code. Speaking of which, we have the 1 copy of Access Code. This card will seal you games when you get D-Barriered, and even if you don't get D-Barriered, the deck doesn't have that big of a pressure unless you're combining Cat Shark with a Gigantic Sprite. This is the best power play that the deck has without Access Code, but with Access Code, the deck has a lot more kill pressure, which makes the deck a lot more threatened. And the last monster in the extra deck is 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World, because if you're playing against something like a Marincess, or you're playing against Adignisters, the only way to deal with unaffect monsters in this deck is combining Cat Shark with Gigantic Sprite to make it 64k. But if your opponent holds a negate for Cat Shark, because they know what this deck does, because everyone is going to know eventually what this deck does, then you don't really have an out to unaffected monsters. So you need to play this card in your extra deck, just in case you play against those decks, especially against Marincess, because it has become a lot more popular lately, and the deck does not have any problem whatsoever getting a lot of monsters on the board, so you can basically get 4 monsters, and then link for 5, their best monster is gone, and you get a monster on the field that is actually a decent card to have on the board, which negates effects that summon from the graveyard, and can also be affected only by effects that target. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Sprites are just going to be a menace in the upcoming format. Are they going to be tier 0? Maybe. We'll find out really, really soon. But regardless, you need to be prepared to play against this deck, or if you want to play with the deck, then you need to be prepared to play against a lot of mirror matches, which is why I've given you so many options in the deck that can be really good. The mirror match cards like Gamma or Dark Ruler No More. So yeah, you basically know exactly what the deck does now, what the deck's choke points are, and exactly how to play around a lot of cards that people are going to play against the deck that they think they're gonna work, like D-Barrier, but in reality, they won't work. So yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.